Sometimes the people we love most are capable of breaking our hearts in ways we never imagined. What happens when decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and devotion crumble in a single moment? When the person you've stood by through every storm suddenly becomes the storm itself. This is the story of Charles and Camilla, a couple whose love story seemed unbreakable to the outside world. But behind closed doors, tensions had been building like pressure in a volcano, ready to explode. What started as a simple evening at home would become the night that changed everything between them. Some moments define us. Some decisions reveal who we truly are when everything we've built is on the line. And some moves are so shocking, so unexpected, that they leave everyone in the room speechless, watching as love transforms into something unrecognizable. You're about to witness one man's choice that will shake the very foundation of his marriage, leaving his wife standing in tearful silence, wondering how they got to this point. This isn't just a story about a relationship falling apart. It's about the moment when pretending everything is fine becomes impossible. Are you ready to see how one shocking move can change two lives forever? The dinner party was supposed to be perfect. Camilla had spent 3 days preparing for this evening, carefully selecting the menu, polishing the silver, and arranging fresh flowers throughout their elegant dining room. The guests arriving tonight were important to Charles's career, and she knew how much this meant to him. For 23 years of marriage, she had played the role of the supportive wife flawlessly, and tonight would be no different. At least, that's what she thought. Charles stood in their bedroom, adjusting his tie in the mirror. His reflection showed a man who had aged well, salt and pepper hair that gave him a distinguished look, and the kind of confidence that came from years of success in his law firm. But Camilla noticed something different in his eyes lately, a distance that hadn't been there before, a coldness that made her stomach tighten with worry. "The caterers finished setting up 20 minutes ago," she said, smoothing down her navy blue dress. "Margaret and David should be here any moment." Charles nodded without turning around. "Good. This partnership decision is crucial, Camilla. These people need to see us as a strong, stable couple. My reputation depends on it." Something in his tone made her pause. Not the words themselves, but the way he said us, like it was a business arrangement rather than a marriage. She pushed the feeling aside. Tonight wasn't the time for doubts. The doorbell rang, and Camilla felt her heart skip. She had always been nervous about entertaining Charles's colleagues, worried she might say the wrong thing or embarrass him somehow. He had made it clear over the years that appearances mattered in his world, and she had learned to be careful with every word, every gesture. "Showtime," Charles said, finally, turning to face her. For a moment, his expression softened. "You look beautiful tonight." The compliment should have warmed her, but something felt hollow about it, like he was reading lines from a script rather than speaking from his heart. Still, she smiled and took his offered arm as they walked downstairs together. The evening began exactly as planned. Margaret and David Harrison arrived first, followed by James and Patricia Collins, and finally, Robert and Susan Mitchell. These were the partners and their wives from Charles's firm, the people who would vote on his promotion to senior partner next month. Camilla played her part perfectly, offering drinks, making pleasant conversation about gardening and charity work, and ensuring everyone felt welcome. "Camilla, this salmon is absolutely divine," Patricia said during dinner. "You must give me the recipe." "Oh, it's nothing special," Camilla replied modestly, though she had spent hours perfecting the dish. "Just a family recipe with a few personal touches." Charles reached over and squeezed her hand. "My wife is too humble. She's an incredible cook and hostess. I'm the lucky one." The gesture felt genuine, and for a moment, Camilla allowed herself to relax. Maybe she had been imagining the distance between them. Maybe tonight would remind them both of what they had built together. But as the evening progressed, she began to notice small things that made her uncomfortable. The way Charles's laugh seemed forced when Robert told his stories. How he kept checking his phone, even though he usually put it away during dinner parties. The slight tension in his shoulders that she recognized from his most stressful court cases. "Charles tells us you're involved with the Children's Hospital charity," Margaret said, drawing Camilla back into the conversation. "Yes, I've been volunteering there for about 5 years now. It's incredibly rewarding work." Camilla's face lit up as she spoke about something she was truly passionate about. "We're actually planning a fundraising gala next spring. The money will go toward a new pediatric wing." "How wonderful," Susan chimed in. "It must be so fulfilling to make a real difference in children's lives." "It is," Camilla said, feeling more confident. "Sometimes I think about going back to school, Maybe getting my degree in social work. I know it sounds silly at my age, but Camilla's always full of these grand plans, Charles interrupted with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. But, with everything on my plate at the firm, I need her focused here at home. This partnership requires both of us to be fully committed to our roles. The comment stung more than it should have. Camilla felt her cheeks flush as the other wives exchanged glances. She had mentioned the social work idea to Charles months ago, thinking he might be supportive. Instead, he had dismissed it then, just as he was dismissing it now, but this time in front of people who mattered to his career. She forced a smile. Of course, Charles's career is our priority right now. The conversation moved on, but Camilla felt something shift inside her. A small crack in the perfect facade she had been maintaining. She excused herself to check on dessert, needing a moment alone in the kitchen to compose herself. As she stood there arranging the chocolate tart on individual plates, she heard voices from the dining room. The conversation had turned to business, and she found herself listening despite knowing she shouldn't. The Morrison case is going to be huge, Robert was saying. Whoever leads that team will basically secure their place as senior partner. I heard Jennifer Walsh is being considered too, David added. She's been making quite an impression with her recent wins. There was a pause, and then Charles's voice, lower than before. Jennifer certainly has her advantages. Young, hungry, no family obligations holding her back. Unlike those of us with wives and responsibilities, James said with a chuckle. Exactly, Charles replied. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices earlier on. Stayed focused purely on my career instead of settling down so young. Camilla's hands froze over the dessert plates. The words hit her like a physical blow. After 23 years of marriage, after all the sacrifices she had made to support his dreams, he was talking about their life together like it was a mistake. Like she was an obstacle to his success rather than a partner in it. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe he was just nervous about the partnership, and didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the casual tone in his voice, the easy way he had dismissed their entire marriage as a limitation, made her stomach churn. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the dessert plates and returned to the dining room, her smile firmly back in place. No one seemed to notice anything wrong as she served the tart and refilled coffee cups. She was an expert at hiding her feelings by now. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Camilla responded to questions, laughed at jokes, and played the perfect hostess while her mind raced. Every kind word Charles spoke to her now felt like a performance for their guests. Every touch seemed calculated rather than affectionate. When the last guest finally left, Camilla began clearing the dining room table in silence. Charles loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch, looking satisfied with how the evening had gone. I think that went well, he said, settling into his favorite armchair. Robert seemed impressed with the whole setup. You did a good job tonight. A good job. Like she was an employee who had completed a task satisfactorily. Camilla continued stacking plates, not trusting herself to speak yet. Margaret mentioned that you seemed a bit quiet during dessert. Charles continued, scrolling through his phone. I hope you weren't feeling unwell. It's important that you appear engaged when we have company. That was it. The final straw that broke something inside her. Camilla set down the plates with more force than necessary, the sound echoing through the quiet room. Engaged, she repeated, turning to face him. You want to talk about being engaged? Charles looked up from his phone, surprised by her tone. What's wrong with you? The evening went perfectly. Perfect for who, Charles? Perfect for your career? Perfect for your image. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Because it certainly wasn't perfect for me. He frowned, setting down his drink. What are you talking about? You did exactly what we discussed. You were charming, gracious, supportive. Supportive of what? Of you dismissing my dreams in front of your colleagues? Of you reducing our marriage to a business arrangement? Her voice was getting louder, 23 years of suppressed frustrations finally, finding their way to the surface. I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard you, she interrupted, surprising them both with her firmness. I heard you tell them that marrying me was settling, that having a family was an obstacle to your success, that you wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices. Charles's face went pale, then flushed red. For a moment, he looked genuinely caught off guard. Then, his expression hardened into something she had seen in court, but never directed at her. You were eavesdropping on a private conversation, he said coldly. Men talk, Camilla. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything. The words came out louder than she intended, her voice cracking with emotion. It means that after 23 years of marriage, After everything I've given up to support your career, you see me as a burden, as something you settled for. They stared at each other across the elegant dining room, the remnants of their perfect evening scattered around them like debris from an explosion. For the first time in their marriage, Camilla wasn't backing down, wasn't smoothing things over with an apology or understanding smile. And Charles, for the first time in years, was seeing his wife not as the perfect accessory to his successful life, but as a woman with her own feelings, her own dreams, and her own breaking point. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the moment everything changed. This was the beginning of the end of the life they had built together, and the first crack in a foundation that had been weaker than either of them wanted to admit. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that had opened in the floor of their dining room. Camilla stood with her hands pressed against the mahogany table, breathing hard from the confrontation she had never planned to have. Charles remained in his chair, his scotch forgotten, staring at his wife as if seeing a stranger. "You're overreacting," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "I was just venting some stress about work. It has nothing to do with how I feel about our marriage." But even as he said the words, they both knew he was lying. The truth hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to ignore or clear away. Camilla had heard what she had heard, and, more importantly, she had recognized the honesty in his voice when he thought she couldn't hear him. "Charles," she said quietly, her anger giving way to something deeper and more painful. "When was the last time you looked at me and felt happy? Really happy, not just satisfied with how well I played my role?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to give an automatic answer, then closed it again. When had he last felt that spark of joy when Camilla walked into a room? When had he last felt grateful for her presence rather than simply accustomed to it? "That's not fair," he said instead of answering. "Marriage isn't about constant happiness. It's about partnership, stability, building a life together." "Building whose life?" Camilla asked, moving around the table to face him directly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've spent 23 years building your life while mine disappeared piece by piece." She was right, and they both knew it. Every decision they had made as a couple had prioritized Charles's career, his dreams, his timeline. When they were newlyweds, Camilla had been pursuing her master's degree in social work. She had put that on hold when Charles got his first big break at the firm and needed her support. The pause had turned into years, and the years had turned into decades. "You chose this life too," Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nobody forced you to give up your career." "Nobody forced me," Camilla agreed, sinking into the chair across from him. "But you made it very clear what you needed from me. Every time I mentioned going back to school or taking a job, you had a reason why the timing wasn't right. There was always some important case, some crucial dinner party, some reason why I needed to focus on being your wife instead of being myself." Charles looked around the room at the evidence of their successful life together. The expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, the oil paintings Camilla had chosen with such care. From the outside, they had everything. So why did he feel so empty? "I provided for you," he said weakly. "I gave you a beautiful home, financial security, a position in society. Most women would be grateful. Most women would be grateful," Camilla repeated, her voice hollow. "Do you hear yourself? I'm not most women, Charles. I'm your wife. Or at least, I thought I was." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and it cut through Charles's defenses in a way her anger hadn't. For a moment, he saw her clearly, not as the perfect hostess or the supportive wife, but as Camilla, the woman who used to laugh so hard at his jokes that she would snort, which always made him laugh too. The woman who would stay up all night when he was stressed about a case, making tea and listening to him rehearse his arguments. The woman who had once looked at him like he hung the moon. When had he stopped seeing her that way? When had she become just another part of his successful life rather than the person he wanted to share that success with? "I remember when we first met," Camilla said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "You were so passionate about helping people, about using law to make the world more fair. You talked about defending those who couldn't defend themselves, about being the voice for people who didn't have one." Charles shifted uncomfortably. His early idealism felt naive now, impractical in the face of the realities of building a successful practice. "I grew up. I learned how the world really works." "No," Camilla shook her head. "You changed. We both did. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became. I don't even know what we became. Player and audience? Boss and employee?" The accuracy of her words stung. When had their conversations become limited to his work schedule, social obligations, and household logistics? When had they stopped talking about dreams, hopes, fears? When had they stopped really talking at all? What do you want me to say? Charles asked, exhaustion creeping into his voice. That I've made mistakes? That I should have been more supportive of your goals? Fine. I'm sorry. But we can't change the past. I'm not asking you to change the past, Camilla said, standing up again. I'm asking you to acknowledge what the past was. I'm asking you to admit that our marriage became about your success and my sacrifice, and that maybe, just maybe, you're not as happy with that arrangement as you pretend to be. Charles looked at his wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Or maybe he had noticed, and chosen to ignore it. When had she stopped smiling the way she used to? When had her laughter become polite rather than genuine? I do appreciate everything you've done, he said finally. I know you gave up a lot for us. For you, she corrected. I gave up a lot for you. And I was willing to do that because I believed we were building something together. But tonight I realized that you see my sacrifices as my job rather than my choice. You see our marriage as something that holds you back rather than something that lifts you up. The truth of her words settled over them like a weight. Charles wanted to deny it, to argue, to make her understand that she was wrong. But he couldn't, because she wasn't wrong. Somewhere along the way, their marriage had become a comfortable arrangement rather than a passionate partnership. So what are you saying, he asked? That you want a divorce? The word hung between them like a blade. Neither of them had said it out loud before, though it had been lurking in the shadows of their relationship for longer than either wanted to admit. I'm saying that I want to feel alive again, Camilla said, tears finally spilling over. I want to wake up in the morning and feel like I have a purpose beyond making your life easier. I want to have dreams that matter, goals that are mine, conversations that go deeper than what's for dinner and who we're entertaining this weekend. Charles felt something crack inside his chest. Not just his pride or his sense of control, but something deeper. The realization that he had been so focused on building the life he thought he wanted that he had forgotten to live the life he actually had. And you don't think we can have that together? He asked quietly. Camilla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I don't know. Can we? Can you look at me and see a partner instead of a supporting character in your story? Can you be excited about my dreams, even if they don't directly benefit your career? Can you love me for who I am instead of what I do for you? The questions hit him like punches to the gut because he couldn't answer them with confidence. Had he ever truly supported Camilla's dreams? Had he ever encouraged her to pursue something just because it made her happy? Or had he always found ways to redirect her energy towards supporting his ambitions? I love you, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Do you? Camilla asked. Or do you love the idea of me? The perfect wife who makes your life run smoothly and never asks for anything that might inconvenience you. Charles opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. How could he argue when she had just described exactly how he had been thinking about their marriage? How could he deny that he had been treating her like a very efficient, very attractive assistant rather than his life partner? I need some air, Camilla said suddenly, grabbing her purse from the side table. I need to think. Where are you going? Charles asked, panic creeping into his voice. This conversation was spiraling beyond anything he had expected or knew how to handle. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe to Sarah's house. Maybe just for a drive. I just know I can't be here right now, pretending that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to face him. You know what the saddest part is, Charles? I think we both know you'd be relieved if I just disappeared. Not permanently, just quietly. Enough that you could pursue whatever it is you really want without feeling guilty about it. The accusation hit its mark because there was truth in it. How many times had he fantasized about being single again? How many times had he watched his unmarried colleagues with envy, imagining the freedom they had to focus entirely on their careers, to make decisions based solely on their own desires? But he had never imagined what it would actually feel like to lose Camilla. He had never considered that his comfortable, predictable life might suddenly feel empty without her in it. Don't go, he said, standing up. We can work this out. We can talk about it. We just did talk about it, Camilla replied sadly. And look where it got us. She walked toward the front door, leaving Charles standing alone among the remnants of their perfect dinner party. The dishes were still scattered across the table. The flowers she had arranged so carefully were already beginning to wilt, and the life they had built together suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. As the front door closed behind her, Charles sank back into his chair and picked up his scotch with shaking hands. For the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't in control of the outcome. And, for the first time since he could remember, he wondered if winning the partnership would feel hollow if he had no one who truly loved him to share it with. Charles sat alone in his dining room for what felt like hours, though the grandfather clock in the hallway told him it had only been 43 minutes since Camilla left. The scotch in his glass had grown warm, and the silence in the house pressed against him like a living thing. He had always prided himself on his ability to think clearly under pressure, to analyze problems, and find solutions. But, tonight, he felt lost in a way that no amount of legal training had prepared him for. His phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, his heart leaped, hoping it was Camilla. Instead, it was from Jennifer Walsh, his colleague, and the only other serious contender for senior partner. Great dinner party tonight. Heard it went really well. Coffee tomorrow to discuss the Morrison case. Charles stared at the message, remembering his earlier comment about Jennifer's advantages. Young, hungry, no family obligations. The irony wasn't lost on him that she was texting him at 11:30 on a Friday night, probably working on case files while he sat in his empty house, his marriage crumbling around him. He didn't reply. Instead, he found himself walking through the house, really seeing it for the first time in years. Every room bore traces of Camilla's influence, her careful attention to detail, her ability to make a house feel like a home. The throw pillows she had sewn by hand when they were young and couldn't afford expensive ones. The photographs she had arranged on the mantelpiece, chronicling their life together from their honeymoon in Tuscany to last Christmas with her parents. In his study, Charles pulled out a bottle of single malt whiskey that had been a gift from Camilla for his 40th birthday. She had saved for months to buy it. He remembered, choosing it because the salesman told her it was favored by successful lawyers. Even then, even in her gift-giving, she had been thinking about his career, his image, his success. As he poured himself a proper drink, Charles caught sight of a framed photo on his desk that he hadn't really looked at in years. It was from their 5th wedding anniversary, taken at a little restaurant in the mountains where they had spent the weekend. Camilla was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled with genuine joy. Charles in the photo was looking at her with an expression of complete adoration, as if she was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. When had he stopped looking at her that way? The question haunted him as he settled into his leather chair and opened his laptop. Force of habit made him check his emails, but, for once, work felt like the least important thing in his life. Instead, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his computer, diving deeper into their shared history. Their wedding day. Camilla looked radiant in her simple but elegant dress, her smile so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire church. Charles remembered how nervous he had been, not about marrying her, but about being worthy of the love she so freely gave him. She had seemed like magic to him then, this beautiful, intelligent woman who saw something in him that he didn't even see in himself. There were photos from their first apartment, tiny and cramped but filled with laughter. Camilla painting the kitchen walls while Charles assembled furniture with typically male stubbornness, refusing to read the instructions. They had been broke, but happy, dreaming together about the future they would build. He found pictures from the charity event where they first met. Camilla had been volunteering at a legal aid fundraiser, serving food and charming donors with her warmth and genuine interest in the cause. Charles had been a young lawyer trying to network, but he had found himself drawn to the woman behind the serving table who talked to homeless veterans like they were old friends and made everyone feel valued and heard. That was who she still was, he realized. That compassionate, caring person who saw the best in everyone. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing it. He had gotten so caught up in climbing the ladder of success that he had forgotten to look beside him at the person who was climbing it with him. Charles's phone rang, jolting him out of his memories. This time it was Camilla. "I'm at Sarah's house," she said without preamble. Her voice sounded tired, drained of the emotion that had filled their earlier confrontation. "I needed you to know I'm safe." "Thank you," Charles said, relief flooding through him. "Are you coming home tonight?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. I need time to think, Charles. About what I want, about what we both want. About whether we can fix this or if it's already too broken." The word broken hit him like a physical blow. "Camilla, please. Come home, and we can talk about this. We can figure it out together." "Can we?" she asked sadly. "Because I've been thinking about our conversation tonight, and I realized something. You asked me when was the last time you looked at me, and felt happy. But I need to ask you something harder. When was the last time you looked at me and felt proud? Not proud of how well I played my role, but proud of who I am as a person. The question left Charles speechless. When had he last felt proud of Camilla for her own accomplishments rather than her support of his? When had he last bragged about her volunteer work at the hospital, or her ability to make anyone feel welcome in their home, or her incredible skill at listening to people and making them feel heard? I can tell by your silence that you're struggling to answer, Camilla continued. And that tells me everything I need to know. That's not fair, Charles protested weakly. I'm proud of you. Of course I'm proud of you. For what? She asked quietly. What am I that makes you proud, besides Mrs. Charles Anderson? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and Charles found himself searching for an answer that wouldn't sound hollow or patronizing. But the truth was, he had been thinking of her primarily as his wife for so long that he had forgotten to see her as an individual with her own worth, her own achievements, her own dreams. I'm proud of your kindness, he said finally. The way you make everyone feel important and valued. I'm proud of your intelligence, your ability to see solutions to problems that I miss completely. I'm proud of how much the families at the children's hospital love you, how you've made that place better just by being there. The words came easier once he started, and Charles realized they were all true. Camilla had always been remarkable, but he had taken her remarkableness for granted because it made his life easier rather than more complicated. Those are nice words, Camilla said softly. But, Charles, when was the last time you encouraged me to do more of those things? When was the last time you suggested I spend more time at the hospital because it made me happy, even if it meant less time managing your schedule? When was the last time you asked me about my dreams instead of talking about yours? Again, silence. Charles was beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't just about tonight's dinner party or even about their recent problems. This was about years of accumulated disappointments, years of Camilla slowly disappearing into the role of his supporting player. I want to try, he said desperately. I want to do better. I want to learn how to be the partner you deserve. Do you? Camilla asked. Or do you want to save your marriage because losing it would be inconvenient for your career? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Charles couldn't deny that his first thought had been about how divorce would look to the partners at his firm, how it might affect his chances for promotion. But, sitting here alone, surrounded by reminders of the life they had built together, he was beginning to realize that losing Camilla would mean losing much more than just his perfect image. I want to save our marriage because I love you, he said. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. But you have been imagining it, Camilla pointed out. You said so yourself tonight. You wondered what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices. Charles closed his eyes, remembering his casual comments to his colleagues. How thoughtless he had been. How cruel without even meaning to be. I was just talking, Camilla. Men say stupid things when they're stressed about work. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you were being honest for the first time in years. The possibility hung between them like a chasm. Had he been lying to himself about his happiness all this time? Had he been so focused on achieving success that he had forgotten to question whether the life he was building was actually the life he wanted? What do you want me to say? Charles asked, frustration creeping back into his voice. That our marriage has been perfect? That I've never had doubts or wondered about different paths? Everyone wonders about the road not taken, Camilla. That doesn't mean they want to change their lives. Doesn't it? She asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've been feeling trapped in our marriage for years and just never had the courage to admit it. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Charles had felt trapped sometimes, suffocated by the expectations and responsibilities that came with being a husband. But he had always told himself that was normal, that everyone felt that way sometimes. Now, faced with the possibility of actually losing those responsibilities, he was surprised to find that the prospect didn't feel liberating. It felt terrifying. I don't want to lose you, he said simply. Then, prove it, Camilla replied. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that you see me as a person worth fighting for, not just a wife worth keeping. How? Charles asked. Tell me how to fix this. I can't tell you how to fix this, Camilla said sadly. That's the point, Charles. I can't solve this problem for you the way I've solved every other problem in your life. You have to figure out what you really want, and you have to decide if I'm part of it. Not as your assistant or your hostess or your image consultant, but as your partner. The line went quiet, and for a moment Charles thought she had hung up. Then he heard her voice again, softer now, more vulnerable. I'm going to stay here tonight, she said. Maybe longer. I need space to figure out who I am when I'm not busy being who you need me to be. Camilla, please. I love you, Charles, she interrupted. But I'm not sure love is enough anymore. I need to know that the person I love respects me, values me, sees me. And I need to remember who I am when I'm not defined by someone else's needs. The call ended, leaving Charles alone with the echo of her words and the devastating realization that his perfect life might not have been so perfect after all. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no strategy, no clear path forward. All he had was the growing certainty that he had been a fool, and the desperate hope that it wasn't too late to become the man his wife deserved. 3 weeks passed without Camilla coming home. 3 weeks during which Charles threw himself into work with a desperation he had never felt before, as if success could somehow fill the growing void in his chest. The Morrison case consumed his days and haunted his nights. It was everything he had worked toward: high-profile, lucrative, career-defining. The kind of case that would guarantee his promotion to senior partner. But, for the first time in his career, Charles found it impossible to concentrate. His assistant had rescheduled 2 client meetings because he seemed distracted and unprepared. His usually sharp legal mind felt clouded, unfocused. He would find himself staring out his office window, not thinking about legal strategies, but wondering what Camilla was doing at that moment. Was she happy staying with Sarah? Was she sleeping well? Was she thinking about him at all? The house felt like a mausoleum. Charles had always prided himself on their elegant home, but without Camilla's presence, it felt cold and sterile. Her coffee cup still sat in the sink from that morning 3 weeks ago. Her book lay open on the nightstand where she had left it. Her favorite sweater hung on the chair in their bedroom, and Charles found himself touching it sometimes, just to remember what it felt like to have her close. On Thursday morning, Robert Mitchell called Charles into his office. The senior partner's expression was serious as he gestured for Charles to sit down. "Charles, I'll get straight to the point," Robert said. "The partners have been discussing the Morrison case assignment. We've decided to give it to Jennifer Walsh." The words hit Charles like a physical blow. He had been so certain that the case was his, that his years of dedication and sacrifice had earned him this opportunity. "I don't understand," Charles said carefully. "My track record speaks for itself. I've brought in more billable hours than anyone else in the firm for 3 years running." "Your work has been exemplary," Robert agreed. "But, lately, you seem distracted, unfocused. The Morrison case requires someone who can give it their complete attention, and, frankly, we're not confident that's you right now." Charles felt his entire career slipping away. "If this is about my personal situation, it's about your professional performance," Robert interrupted. "But, Charles, your personal situation is affecting that performance. Everyone can see it." The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, but Charles barely heard the rest of it. Something about taking some time to get his life sorted out and reconsidering his candidacy for senior partner next year. The words washed over him like water, meaningless compared to the crushing realization that everything he had worked for was crumbling. When he finally left Robert's office, Charles felt numb. He should be angry, he thought. He should be fighting this decision, arguing his case, doing everything in his power to change their minds. Instead, all he could think about was what Camilla had said 3 weeks ago. "You wondered what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices." That afternoon, Jennifer Walsh knocked on his office door. She looked uncomfortable but determined as she stepped inside. "Charles, I wanted to talk to you about the Morrison case," she said, closing the door behind her. "Congratulations," Charles said flatly. "I'm sure you'll do excellent work." Jennifer studied his face for a moment. "You don't look like a man who's upset about losing a case. You look like a man who's lost something much more important." The observation surprised him with its accuracy. "I'm fine, Jennifer. Just tired." "No, you're not," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "And I think I know why." Charles raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I've watched you for the past few years," Jennifer said. "You're brilliant, dedicated, successful. But you're also miserable. You go through the motions of having everything you want, but you look like you're dying inside." "That's quite an analysis from someone who barely knows me," Charles said defensively. "You're right, I don't know you well," Jennifer admitted. "But I know what it looks like when someone sacrifices everything for their career and then realizes it wasn't worth the price." Her words echoed uncomfortably with thoughts Charles had been trying to suppress. "And what would you know about sacrifice?" "More than you might think," Jennifer replied. "I've been where you are, Charles. Completely focused on success, willing to give up anything and anyone who might slow me down. It took me almost losing the person I loved most to realize that winning isn't worth much if you have no one to share it with." Charles found himself actually listening, perhaps for the first time in weeks. "What did you do?" "I chose love over ambition," Jennifer said simply. I turned down a partnership at my last firm because it would have meant moving across the country, away from the woman I wanted to marry. Best decision I ever made. And you don't regret it? The partnership you gave up? Jennifer smiled. I got a better partnership. One that means something. Charles, can I ask you something? He nodded. When was the last time you went home and felt genuinely excited to be there? When was the last time you achieved something and your first thought was about sharing it with someone who would be proud of you? The questions hit too close to home. Charles couldn't remember the last time he had felt excitement about anything outside of work. And, as for sharing achievements, he realized that even his professional successes felt hollow because there was no one in his life who truly understood their significance. Your wife left you, didn't she? Jennifer asked gently. Charles nodded, not trusting his voice. Because she felt like she didn't matter to you anymore? Another nod. Charles, I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy, but hear me out. I don't want the Morrison case. Charles looked up sharply. What? I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I heard about your situation. This case represents everything that's wrong with how we approach success in this profession. It's about money and prestige and power, but it's not about justice or helping people or making the world better. It's just about winning. That's what law firms do. Charles said weakly. We win cases for clients who can afford to pay us. Is that why you became a lawyer? Jennifer asked. Because I remember hearing stories about your early career. Pro bono work, civil rights cases, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. What happened to that lawyer? Charles felt something stir inside him, a memory of the idealism he had buried under years of pragmatism and ambition. That lawyer didn't make enough money to support a family. Are you sure about that? Or did that lawyer just get seduced by a different definition of success? The conversation continued for another hour, and by the end of it, Charles found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his own priorities. Jennifer's words kept echoing in his mind as he drove home that evening. Winning isn't worth much if you have no one to share it with. That night, Charles sat in his study with a legal pad, doing something he hadn't done in years. He made a list, not of legal strategies or career goals, but of things that actually mattered to him, things that made him feel alive rather than just successful. At the top of the list, he wrote Camilla. Below that, helping people who need it, making a difference, being someone worth loving, building something real instead of just something impressive. As he stared at the list, Charles realized that somewhere in his pursuit of professional success, he had lost track of everything that actually gave life meaning. He had become so focused on climbing the ladder that he had forgotten to ask whether the ladder was leaning against the right wall. The next morning, Charles called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Instead of going to the office, he drove to Sarah's house, where Camilla had been staying. His hands shook as he knocked on the door. Sarah answered, her expression carefully neutral. Charles, she's not here. She's at the children's hospital. Thank you, he said, then paused. Sarah, can I ask you something? Has she seemed? Is she doing okay? Sarah's expression softened slightly. She's healing, Charles. For the first time in years, she's remembering who she is when she's not trying to be who someone else needs her to be. The words stung, but Charles nodded. I'm glad. She deserves to be happy. Yes, she does, Sarah agreed. The question is, do you deserve to be part of that happiness? Charles didn't answer because he didn't know, but he was determined to find out. He drove to the children's hospital, his heart pounding. Through the windows of the pediatric ward, he could see Camilla reading to a group of young patients. She was animated, using different voices for the characters, and the children were captivated. Her face was lit up with genuine joy in a way Charles hadn't seen in years. This was who she was when she was free to be herself. This was the woman he had fallen in love with but had gradually asked to hide so she could better support his image. Standing there, watching her through the glass, Charles made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. A decision so shocking, so completely contrary to everything he had been working toward, that even he could barely believe he was contemplating it. But, for the first time in years, he was absolutely certain it was the right choice. He was going to quit his job, give up his partnership track, and find a way to become the man Camilla deserved, even if it meant starting over completely. Charles waited in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours until Camilla emerged from the building. She walked slowly, her volunteer badge still pinned to her sweater, looking more peaceful than he had seen her in months. When she noticed him leaning against his car, she stopped walking, and, for a moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance of the parking lot. She approached cautiously, as if he were a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. What are you doing here, Charles? I need to tell you something, he said, his voice hoarse with nervousness. Something I should have said 3 weeks ago? Something I should have realized years ago. Camilla crossed her arms, her expression guarded. If this is about me coming home, it's not, Charles interrupted. Well, it is, but not the way you think. Camilla, I quit my job today. The words hung in the air between them like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded. Camilla's eyes widened, her mouth falling open in shock. You what? I quit, Charles repeated, and even saying it again felt surreal. I walked into Robert's office this morning and told him I was resigning, effective immediately. That's impossible, Camilla said, shaking her head. Your career is everything to you. You've worked toward partnership for 15 years. You wouldn't just throw that away. I thought my career was everything to me too, Charles said. But it turns out I was wrong. It turns out that having everything I thought I wanted means nothing if the person I love isn't there to share it with. Camilla took a step back, as if his words had physically pushed her. Charles, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset about our separation, but that doesn't mean you should destroy your career. We can figure out our problems without you making such a drastic decision. This isn't about saving our marriage, Charles said, though even as he said it, he hoped desperately that it might. This is about saving myself. Camilla, I've spent so many years becoming someone I don't even recognize. Someone who values success over compassion, who sees the people he loves as supporting characters in his own story. He took a deep breath, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. I've been watching you through that window for the past 2 hours, seeing you with those children. Seeing you be yourself, completely, and authentically yourself. And I realized something terrible. I can't remember the last time I saw you look that happy when you were with me. Tears welled up in Camilla's eyes, but she didn't speak. I've turned our marriage into a business arrangement, Charles continued. I've turned you into an employee whose job was to make my life easier and my image better. And the worst part is, I convinced myself that was love. Charles, stop, Camilla whispered, but he couldn't stop now. The words had been building inside him for weeks, and they needed to come out. Do you know what made me quit today? It wasn't losing the Morrison case or missing out on partnership. It was realizing that I had become the kind of man who could lose the best thing in his life and still show up to work the next day like nothing had happened. Charles's voice broke on the last words, and he had to pause to compose himself. I became the kind of man who could see his wife's dreams as inconvenient obstacles rather than beautiful possibilities. The kind of man who could take someone as remarkable as you and try to make her smaller so she would fit better into my plans. You don't understand what you're doing, Camilla said, her voice thick with unshed tears. You've worked so hard for this career. You can't just throw it all away because we're having problems. What will you do? How will you support yourself? What about all your plans? My plans. Charles laughed, but there was no humor in it. My plans were to become senior partner, make more money, gain more prestige, climb higher and higher until I reached some mythical pinnacle of success where I would finally be happy. But I was already there, Camilla. I was already at the pinnacle. I had a brilliant career, a beautiful home, and the most amazing woman in the world as my wife. And I was miserable because I was too blind to see what I actually had. He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the confusion and pain in her eyes. I'm going to start over. I'm going to go back to the kind of law I practiced when we first met, when you fell in love with a man who wanted to help people instead of just help himself. I'm going to take civil rights cases and pro bono work and fight for people who need someone to fight for them. That's financial suicide, Camilla protested. We'll lose the house, the lifestyle, everything we've built. We've already lost everything that matters, Charles said softly. What good is a beautiful house if it doesn't feel like a home? What good is financial security if we're too emotionally bankrupt to enjoy it? Camilla stared at him for a long moment, and Charles could see her mind racing, trying to process this complete upheaval of everything she thought she knew about him. You're serious, she said finally. You actually quit. I told Robert that I was grateful for the opportunities he had given me, but that I needed to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place. I told him I was going to hang out my own shingle and practice law the way it was meant to be practiced. And what did he say? Charles smiled ruefully. He said I was having a midlife crisis and making a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. He might be right about the regret part, but he's wrong about it being a crisis. This is the first clear thinking I've done in years. They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of Charles's decision settling between them like a new reality they both had to learn to navigate. Why are you telling me this? Camilla asked finally. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, Charles said, and he meant it. I want to give you something. I want to give you the partner you deserved all along. Someone who celebrates your dreams instead of dismissing them. Someone who encourages you to take up space in the world instead of asking you to make yourself smaller. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is an application to the social work program at the university. I picked it up this morning. The deadline for fall admission is next Friday. Camilla took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully as if it might disappear. I can't guarantee that we can fix our marriage, Charles continued. I can't promise that I'll be able to change 23 years of bad habits overnight. But I can promise that if you give me another chance, I will spend every day trying to become the man you fell in love with. The man who was inspired by your compassion instead of threatened by it. Tears were streaming down Camilla's face now, and she made no effort to wipe them away. Charles, you can't just change your entire life because of our fight. People don't really change, not fundamentally. Maybe you're right, Charles said. Maybe I can't change. But I have to try, Camilla. Not because I want to save our marriage, though God knows I do. I have to try because I can't live with myself as the man I've become. He took a step back, giving her space to process everything he had said. I'm not asking you to come home. I'm not asking you to forgive me or trust me or even give me another chance. I'm just asking you to know that you were right about everything. Our marriage did become about my success and your sacrifice. I did take you for granted. I did stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a role to be filled. Charles, let me finish, he said gently. I need you to know that leaving me was the bravest thing you could have done. Not just for yourself, but for me. Because it forced me to see what I had been refusing to look at for years. He pulled his car keys from his pocket, then paused. I love you, Camilla. Not because of what you do for me, or how you make me look, or how well you manage my life. I love you because you're kind to children who are scared and sick. I love you because you see the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. I love you because you have the courage to pursue your dreams, even when it's terrifying. Charles got in his car, then rolled down the window. I'm going to be a better man, with or without you. But I hope it's with you. As he drove away, Camilla stood in the parking lot clutching the application, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of sadness or anger or frustration. They were tears of something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Behind her, through the windows of the children's hospital, she could see the young patients she had been reading to earlier. Inside the application in her hands was the possibility of helping children like them professionally instead of just as a volunteer. In her heart was the memory of the man she had fallen in love with 25 years ago, and the shocking possibility that he might still exist. Charles's move had broken something in that parking lot. Not their relationship, but the pattern of hurt and resentment that had been building between them for years. His willingness to give up everything he thought he wanted for the chance to become someone worthy of her love was the most shocking thing he had ever done. And as Camilla stood there in tearful silence, she realized it might also be the most beautiful.